This presentation is brought to you by Arizona State University's Global Institute of Sustainability. Sustainability Series. Speakers discuss a range of environmental, social, and economic topics.
How many of you have lived in the Valley more than 10 years? More than 15 years? More than 20 years? Dr. Brooks, put your hand down. How about more than 57 years? I know. So I asked that question because it's really, I think it's incredible. That was a pretty good display. Sometimes when I ask people to hold up their hands, no one in the room, in an audience, has lived in Arizona longer than 10 years. But that was a pretty good display here. So, as Greg mentioned in that very nice introduction, I am raised here. I was born on Okinawa. A little bit about my background. My father was in the Vietnam War and was transferred to Luke Air Force Base, and we landed here in 1968. I went to school on the west side. I come from a very arts-related background. One of the things I have is modified arts right over here, and I also have the record store that Greg mentioned still. I've had it for 25 years. My arts background, my mother owns art galleries, and my father was a jazz musician when he left the military. He was a jazz musician before he went into the military. And so I jokingly say when I came home from school, I came home from college and announced to my parents that I was going to throw away my full-ride scholarship to study architecture, to open up a record store called Stinkweeds. My parents went, "Honey, that's a great idea." So don't worry, I went back to school later, but initially, architecture school at ASU was not working for me, and so I jumped out and did it. And I'll tell you, no one thought I could do it outside of my family. My family was like, everybody is entrepreneurial, and so everybody thought it was a great idea. What's the big deal? My brothers came and helped me build the record bins. I started very, very small. I had 16 CDs the day that I opened in 1987. And mostly vinyl records and a lot of creative ingenuity, and I worked all day, every day, and it's sort of, people just got on board. They loved that store, and they became rabid fans of the store. Pretty soon other cool businesses started to move in around. So in the late 90s, I opened up Modified Arts, which is right over here on what is now Roosevelt Road. Does anybody remember Roosevelt in the late 90s? Okay, I was unable to get 9. I would call and I would order my pizza and they would ask the address and then I would go, "Hello? Hello?" It was rough. And at that point, my mom actually got down on one knee and begged me not to do that. But it's important to know, when we went in there, there were 2 existing businesses. There was a hubcap shop and there was a liquor store. And the liquor store was a drive-through, but nobody had a car, so it was really more of a walk-up. That neighborhood was transformed with the sweat equity of young entrepreneurs who pooled their resources. Collaboration is one of my key themes in everything that I do. So I bring this up because when you talk about economic development, I'm going to be talking about the economy and economic development a lot tonight, and a lot of people shiver and run when they hear that because they think it's going to be really boring. But Roosevelt Row is the perfect example of healthy economic development, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about this. But if you just look at a sliver, in 8 years, we created 147 jobs. We ended up with 12 art galleries, 5 restaurants, 3 wine bars, 3 retailers, and a light rail stop that says Arts District. Without any subsidy or any investment from any government help, it was all sweat equity of young entrepreneurs. Well, when I got there, I will tell you, I was the only one on the street. So I was trying to have a party on every first Friday. So I handmade all of our invitations. For the first 8 years, I made invitations in my yard. My neighbors thought I was crazy. Put them in little special envelopes and mailed them off. And we started to, I mean, I can remember when we were excited to have 300 people. And First Friday now has 12,000 people on a regular basis. It is the largest art walk in the country. Many people don't realize that. So when Greg Esser came and said he was going to open up iLounge next door, he goes, would you mind if we opened up an art gallery? And I just remember I leapt up and hugged him. Because two is greater than one, and then we had 3, and then there were 5, and we were trying to remember the other day the order, and we've lost track of the order, but nonetheless, that is healthy economic development, and we need to create systems and procedures that make it easier for that to happen, not harder. And right now, it's very cumbersome. The process to open up a business is very cumbersome, and it shouldn't be. So 2003 rolls around, and I start learning about the economics behind what local business does. And many of you know this statistic: for every $100 spent in a local business, 45 recirculates and stays right here in Arizona. For the same $100 spent in any national chain, only 13 stays. This study came out of Austin, Texas, and I was so excited about it, I actually flew out to Austin with Cindy Dash, who owns Changing Hands Bookstore. This study was done on the bookstores out there. It was a local bookstore called Book People versus Borders, which was across the street. And so meeting with the people that ran the Austin Alliance that was there, I became super inspired, and Cindy and I came back, and together we launched what was then called Arizona Chain Reaction, which we thought was a very clever name, but it turned out that it was really too adversarial for our purposes. We wanted to deliver a more positive message about local business rather than a negative message about any other type of business. So we changed the name a few years later. But in my mind, some people will ask, how did you get here from a record store to talking about economics? Because at this point, I'm doing a lot of work around smart growth, infill, density, economic development, and it seems like a leap, but to me it seems like a normal step in a person's life, because so many of our bright young people that were coming into my record store and also into my art gallery at this point were leaving Arizona. And in their language, they would say, we're leaving Arizona because there's not enough culture. This place has no soul. I heard that on a regular basis. And I thought, well, I think that this place has a lot of soul, and I feel like there's culture here. Why do some people feel connected to this place and other people don't? What is it about the sense of place that makes people feel like some place is home? So how many of you know someone from Chicago that won't stop telling you how great Chicago is, right? Always at least 25, 30% of the crowd, and there's usually a woman pointing angrily at her husband like that. So I became annoyed, truly annoyed, at how many people were telling me, they would live here, and they were telling me, boy, you guys sure have made a mess. And I thought, who's you guys? I'm pretty sure you live here. And they always talked about how great Chicago was. So I started asking people, I did my little poll, why do you love Chicago so much? You know what they'll tell you? They'll tell you the locally owned businesses. They will tell you the locally owned businesses. And they may not use those words. They'll probably say something like that neighborhood. They'll say those restaurants. They might even say my parents went here or my grandparents went there. I feel rooted to that community. But then they moved to Arizona and they changed their behavior entirely. And they don't act in a local manner. And they eat at a big box or they shop at a big box, and then they don't understand why they don't feel connected to this place. And I would argue, true, I could go to Chicago, having never been there. I could go to Chicago tomorrow and I could eat at Applebee's and hit a Kohl's and a Home Depot and a Lowe's, and I could leave and say, what's the big deal about Chicago, right? And I wouldn't understand their place. So I set out really with 2 goals in mind. 1, to stop the big subsidies that were coming in at that time for big box. 2, to better connect people to place. And I was already doing that with my little businesses, but I wanted to take it out there. I wanted more people to understand how to connect to place. So Greg gave you a little bit of info, but this slide is actually a little old. We're at 2,100 businesses of all sizes. A lot of people mistakenly think we're about shopping. We're about restaurants and retail. But in this, we've got manufacturing. Our largest sector within our organization is actually business services. We have big companies like Bash's, Shamrock, Harkins, Hickman's. So we are the largest coalition. We have an online directory that gets about 38,000 searches. That's not hits to our website, that's searches to our directory. The Buy Local campaign. How many of you feel like you've heard more about buying locally in the last, say, 5 years? Okay, a lot. So 5 years ago, people used to say, what do you mean buy local. The Walmart couldn't be any closer. It's right over the fence from my house, right? That's local. And you try to explain, no, we're talking about the economics behind local. Long-term economic development. We're trying to get people to stop thinking about their purchasing as a simple exchange of money that is over the minute you spend it. Stop trying to get people to stop thinking that cheapest is always better. And we're barraged with that type of advertising. But we'll analyze that together and see why that doesn't work. When I say the word sustainability, most people would think of the environment. But this organization, Local First, is working on economic sustainability. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that, but people weren't thinking about economic sustainability up until just about 5 to 10 years ago. It was always just driven by bigger has got to be better, cheapest has got to be best, and now we're starting to rethink that. Growing deep wealth in a region. I'll explain a little bit more about that, but money is the most powerful thing we have, and it's the thing we think about when we spend it. We really don't think about the depth of where it's going or what is the ROI, what is your return on investment for the way you're spending your money. So for starters, let's talk about small business. A lot of people, when I talk about local business, they immediately, again, like they think about shopping or they think about boutiques and restaurants, they think that local means small. Not necessarily so. So small businesses are incredibly important. They foster a great pedestrian-friendly environment. This is a little restaurant that you may know called Chibo. It was in a blighted old house. These are the kinds of things that are quaint. Le Grand Orange, we'll talk about that a little bit more too. The types of businesses that move into a neighborhood where you're suddenly proud to be in that neighborhood, where you feel connected, where you see your neighbors and you walk your dog. That's the power of small business. Now, as we define local business for the intent of Local First Arizona for our membership, the owner has to live in Arizona 9 months out of the year. The business cannot be publicly traded. It has to be privately held. Once it's publicly traded, your owners live all over the globe and your money goes everywhere. Okay, the business needs to be unique to Arizona, and the majority of the business has to be done in Arizona. I already named off some biggies like GoDaddy. We also have Infusionsoft. Syricom is another big Arizona-based company. Hensley, they're the distributors of Budweiser, but the Hensley family, the whole family still lives here, grew out of Cindy McCain's side. Hickman's family eggs. We got Harkins Theaters. These are all Arizona companies. Bash's is still family owned. It is not a publicly traded organization. So those are very large employers in Arizona. So how many of you have heard this term economic gardening? Anybody? So this is a new form of economic development. Economic development traditionally, as I said, has been how do we build, how do we traditionally grow, how do we create jobs, and sometimes we have gone far off track in thinking about best value, and we end up paying way too much per job by incentivizing. We also don't think about the quality of jobs. So economic gardening really shifts that mindset of how do we get more companies to move here to how do we grow more companies here. So I'm going to give you a few different examples. Economic gardening is about celebrating our existing assets and figuring out how to grow them in the simplest, most economical manner we can. So we'll use Le Grand Orange as an example. This group was a couple, young entrepreneurs, and one other gentleman they had as their partner. They took over Postino first. It was an old post office. And they started Postino, and then they opened Le Grand Orange, and then Chelsea's Kitchen, and then they have the pizza joint. They have all these different things going on there. And when I started Local First Arizona, what I was getting from our elected officials was, oh yeah, we like the local businesses. That's cute. That's great. Neat. So now let's do some real business. So I kept saying, wait a minute. Wait a minute. A business like this, I went in front of the Phoenix City Council, and I said, let's look at this example. What does this mean to the city? $20 million in revenue means $400,000 a year into city coffers. And what did it cost the city of Phoenix? Didn't cost them a dime. It cost them a parking variance, right? They had to go through a hearing and give them a parking variance. It might have cost them some inspector time, but these guys took a blighted post office and turned it around. When we grew up here, Arcadia was a high school, not a neighborhood. Now, Arcadia is not only a neighborhood, you can't buy a house within 10 miles without it saying we're near Arcadia or in Arcadia. Now the neighborhood next door has renamed itself Arcadia Light. Property values have increased because of this. All of the homes in that area are coveted. They transformed that part of the city. That's a pretty good investment, I would say. Now let's juxtapose that with an example. Let's take Cabela's. Okay, everybody familiar with Cabela's? Most people think that Cabela's is in the business of outdoor wear, right? Tents, fishing tackle. They're actually not. They're in the business of subsidies. So what I mean by that is they average $25 million per store in subsidy before they even open their doors. So they send out a team in advance and they negotiate a deal based on the promise of sales tax revenue. Here's what we're going to bring in for you. What are you going to give us? And we're at a disadvantage here in the metropolitan area because all of our cities are nuzzled up next to one another. So you can literally stand on this side of Scottsdale Road and say, well, this is what Phoenix is going to give us. And Scottsdale goes, okay, well, we'll give you a little bit more. And then they go back to Phoenix and say, well, this is what Scottsdale's going to give us. And they negotiate and they ratchet it up. So again, they averaged $25 million in subsidies. Anybody want to guess what they got from the city of Glendale? For one retail store, they got $68 million in subsidies. And that's in a combination of free land, cash, and tax abatement. So tax abatement means if you go in and buy something at a retailer that has a tax abatement, you spend your sales tax with them, they get to keep it, sometimes for as many as 10 years. Okay? So how many of you have heard on the radio today the crisis that Glendale is in? Okay, a lot of this happened around when the Super Bowl came and they wanted to have all these businesses in place. What they didn't understand is with this notion of place making, people wanted to go to authentic Arizona when they got here. They didn't want to go to the same old place where they could go back home. So Glendale spent a ton of money bringing in a lot of national chains, and everybody that was in town went over to Old Town Scottsdale and spent their money. Huge mistakes, and we're seeing the result of that now. They're closing their libraries. But the sad thing is that that was our taxpayer dollar. Those were our taxpayer dollars. The people who live in Glendale paid for that Cabela's, and now they're having their libraries closed. This is a bad form of economic development. They actually call this economic development. This was really popular throughout the 90s and early 2000s, this subsidization of retail and restaurant in order to bring in businesses that promise sales tax returns. Sometimes they pay off. The vast majority of the time they do not pay off. And we can cite this time and time again. Right now, Cabela's is underperforming. No one can hold them accountable. The Bass Pro in Mesa got $32 million in subsidies. They forgot to require the Bass Pro to actually advertise that location. And so when they run an ad in the Sunday paper, it sends you to Bass Pro online. Okay? And the city of Mesa actually ended up with Bass Pro Drive in the deal. So my point is that is a bad deal for taxpayers all the way around, and it simply isn't sustainable. It is not a healthy model for growth. So I talked a little bit about Chicago, and I think that this is a really important piece of what we do, is building civic pride. So we'll go back to the lady from Chicago who is living here now, but she's still in love with Chicago. And she hasn't really put up roots here in Arizona. How does that impact us? Okay? Lower than average voter turnout. She's not feeling accountable for her city or her state. She's still saying, you guys, what are you guys doing, right? Lower voter turnout, lower than average incidences of volunteerism, lower than average charitable contributions, fewer butts in seats at a Diamondbacks game. I mean, let's face it, right? The Cubs could lose for 40 years and not lose a single fan. The Diamondbacks have a bad inning, and we're like, I don't know about you guys. Right? Well, let's think about that. That impacts us economically. When people don't connect to the place where they live, we're getting shortchanged. All these people come here. Let's figure out how to make them Arizonans. So I also put together a few slides here to give you an idea of the impact that small business makes on Arizona. That roughly 95% of us have fewer than 99 employees, $21 billion paid to employees of small businesses. This one usually catches people off guard. If small business was laying off people at the same rate as big business, we'd have 950,000 fewer jobs in America today. Okay, so we get a lot of questions at Local First Arizona of people trying to get us to tell the sad story about how hard it is for small and or local business. And I refuse to play into that. I refuse. Local business can compete if we stop subsidizing the nationals. We can compete and we will. We need a level playing field. And it's up to the people. It's the spending power of the people. We are voting with our dollars every day. If we want more Applebee's, we're going to get more Applebee's because we're just going to go and we're going to eat a lot of food at Applebee's and they will multiply. That's just, we all know that. It's basic economics. If we don't want any more Applebee's and everybody says, nope, we don't like it, guess what? Applebee's goes away. It's like we, the people, have forgotten that we're holding the purse strings in the country. We really have forgotten that. So I'm going to give you an example, and I want to underscore that this is absolutely not a statement. Yes, did you have a question?
No, sorry.
Oh, this is not a statement about Starbucks is bad. This is a much bigger concept than that. We are not an organization when somebody walks into the room with a Starbucks cup and goes, oh, I can't believe you went to Starbucks. I don't care. I don't. Starbucks is a good organization. They pay their employees well. I'm merely using them as an example in this slide. So this side of the screen over here, the left side of the screen represents 15 Starbucks locations here in the Valley. And this side of the screen represents 15 independent coffee shops here in the Valley. So when we talk about dollars recirculating in the community, that's what this slide underscores. So a lot of people will raise their hand and they say, well, I don't understand what you're talking about because Starbucks pays taxes, Starbucks has employees. They're impacting Arizona's economy positively. Well, they are. They absolutely are. And if that was what we were measuring, you'd be absolutely right. They do pay taxes and they do impact our economy by the number of people they employ. So, but let's talk about now how many accountants Starbucks employs in Arizona. How many accountants do you think they support? 0. Okay. How about graphic designers? 0. Web developers? Payroll service providers? Attorneys? Anything? Right? Bueller? Nothing. We buy something there and it immediately goes elsewhere. The money we have spent goes elsewhere other than the taxes they pay and the people they employ here and the simple things like that. So let's look at this side of the screen. How many graphic designers got a gig? 15, right? How many of those coffee shops are going to have a bookkeeper or an accountant? 15. How about web developer? Somebody built our website, right? How about if they need an attorney? How about, you know, I mean, we could go on. You get the point. When you spend your money at one of these coffee shops, they're going to, in turn, spend that money elsewhere. And when you multiply that over an entire community, suddenly we're supporting jobs. If everybody went over here, and this is what has happened in this country, if everybody went over here, we're actually buying our way out of jobs. Because Starbucks, for the hundreds of thousands of locations they have, I don't know the exact number, maybe it's, does anybody know? 20,000? I don't know how many thousands of Starbucks locations they are. They have one accounting firm. Now that's a big accounting firm, I'm sure, but it's one accounting firm. So when you look at something like office supplies, there used to be, in the late 80s, there were 15,000 independent office suppliers in America. They all had accountants, bookkeepers, graphic designers, web developers, yada, 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 yada. Today there are 1,400. 15,000 to 1,400 in less than 30 years. That's a whole lot of jobs, right? That's a whole lot of jobs we went through. And we've done this to ourselves over and over again. So my point is, a lot of times on the news, we're hearing over and over again that the economy is going to get fixed by the federal government. Somebody is going to come forward with a strategy. I would argue that the American consuming public is what's going to fix the economy, or not. So let's continue. So that's secondary jobs. Let's continue and turn the page even more. And we'll talk about tertiary impacts. So over here we've got the accounting firm that remains open because he's got 10 small local business clients. Well, that accounting firm then also has office supplies that they're buying. They also have maybe the janitorial service that comes and keeps the accounting firm clean. Those are dollars that are circulating yet again because of this. And those are gone again when we've spent them at a business that is not located here. So I affectionately call this buying ourselves broke. So we only think over and over again that cheap is best And I'm arguably, arguing with people, helping them understand why it's important that we reevaluate what the true value is. I'll give you another example. A lot of times we think in our minds that we go to the big boxes because they're cheaper. Think about that last slide. We know that Starbucks isn't cheaper. We know that. What about, there was a study that just came out of independent pharmacies. It was a study that looked at the comparison between CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, and a local independent pharmacy. And the local independent pharmacy came in cheapest 40% of the time in 15 different cities. 40% of the time. Don't you think that's enough to actually shop around? We've forgotten how to shop around. We do still have great independent pharmacies here, by the way. So they are there. So there was a study that came out a few years ago that showed when a big box moves in, particularly in a rural area, but generally when a big box moves in and creates 2 jobs, it will eliminate 3 local jobs. So again, I'd like to point out that this is not true economic development. Now, this could be free markets, and we could prepare for this because the chain model is popular. So we should prepare for this because this is going to happen. What I'm saying is that we don't need to pay those companies to do this to us, and we don't need to take taxpayer dollars to pay those companies to do this nonetheless. So I believe that those jobs will be recreated in other ways as long as we continue to consume and to buy from independent businesses who will regrow in other areas. That's all part of a natural cycle. So we did a study in 2008 to look at, to really give an example of this sort of spending that is short-sighted and doesn't really provide you the most value. We looked at the state of Arizona's office supply contract, which is, at the time, was with OfficeMax. It's a $5 million contract that the state had, and they gave it to OfficeMax because OfficeMax had the cheapest price. So this pie chart, what you're looking at is the return on investment. This is how much money stays in Arizona. And we were able to compare hypothetically 3 different types of organizations. We compared OfficeMax, which is a national, obviously, with a regional distribution center here. We compared Staples, which is a national and at the time did not have a regional distribution center here. And we compared WIST, which is a 3rd-generation Arizona company based in Tempe. So we can see that 11.6% of the money we spent, of the $5 million, stayed and recirculated in Arizona when we spent it with OfficeMax. Had we spent it with WIST, 3 times that money would have stayed here in Arizona and recirculated. So let me share with you the methodology. First of all, we looked at jobs. WIST has 100% full-time employees with benefits. Okay? So they take care of their own employees. Both Staples and OfficeMax have brought us approximately 62% part-time employees with no benefits. Now, what does that mean? This is an economic equation. Those part-time employees with no benefits end up on the state health care program. So who's paying for the health care for their employees? Okay, so this is taxpayer money, generally speaking, going to buy office supplies, and yet we're subsidizing the health care for the employees for the cheapest bidder. Well, I would argue that I could lower all of my prices at Stinkweeds if one of you would be so kind as to pay for the health care for my employees. Sounds like a pretty raw deal, right? Okay, so but we get fooled by this on a regular basis and we think it's going to be cheaper. What we're doing is just diffusing the cost and putting it off onto someone else. So charitable contributions is another area that we looked at. WIST gives $35,000 a year to Arizona charities and has done so every year for the last 10 years. It could prove it. OfficeMax and Staples could not point to any example of a charitable contribution in Arizona at all. The third is what we call second-tier jobs, which I explained to you in the coffee slide a minute ago. WIST does business with Arizona. They have local accountants, graphic designers, web developers, attorneys, payroll service providers, etc. Staples and OfficeMax don't have any business that they do secondary or tertiary here in Arizona. So looking at the long-term impacts for these 3, this is pretty astounding. So Staples, if we were just measuring their impact via the sales taxes that they generate and the employees that they create, that is the sliver they have on Arizona's economy. Now, what happened in the state of Arizona is in 2009, the year after this study was completed, the OfficeMax contract expired and Staples undercut them in the new bidding procedure, and we awarded that contract to Staples. Okay, so we're actually moving backwards in terms of what is a good deal. And we can raise our hand and say, but wait, WISC costs more. Does it really? If you're looking at your spending in the very immediate sense, yes. But if you're looking at as trying to grow an economy, no. And also, I would argue, you know, there are several cities around here as well as large businesses that have made the switch to WISC, and they sat down with WISC and looked at their pricing and worked with them and actually came away with a better deal than they were getting before. And you know you're going to get what you order when you order from a local company. So despite everything I've told you about the advantage of local business, we just recently did a study, not we, but some of my colleagues back east, 15 randomly selected cities with a million-plus population, and 90% of their economic development teams were still spending 90% or more of their budget on business attraction. So if economic development might be considered as a five-pointed star, you've got incubators and startups, you've got business attraction, which is what this is, you've got business retention, which is what we're working on, and you got business expansion, which right now in Arizona, arguably, there's not a whole lot of people working on that, and there needs to be. So if we have 90+% of our budget spent on business attraction, that means we've got less than 10% of our budget being invested in business retention, business expansion, incubators, and startups. When we know, you can look at any article, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, doesn't matter. They will tell you that new job creation in America is coming from two distinct areas. It's coming from small business startups and small and mid-sized business expansion. And I just said, here in Arizona, we are not focused on business expansion. We are focused on business attraction. So I'm advocating that we switch that around. The old model is we focus on the global, and somehow it must be better if it came from somewhere else. And well, you local guys better just, you know, hang on for dear life. I'm advocating that we switch at least part of that, not all of it. I am not a naive person who says we should be protectionists and we should only have local economies. I'm saying, what if we shifted even 30–40% of our budget to focus on business retention and expansion? What if we really connected people to place? What if we had a super healthy, local, vibrant economy and people were proud to go? What if Arcadia bled through every part of the whole valley? Guess what? We'd have a community where business wanted to be, and they would come here, and perhaps we wouldn't have to pay them so much to get them to come here. And we certainly wouldn't be paying restaurants and retail. I want to say that distinctly because base industry sector that creates jobs, that's a different deal than paying Cabela's millions of dollars to come here. I do believe that business attraction is highly important, but I think that if we had a stronger local economy, we wouldn't have to pay them so much. They would actually want to come here. So I'm going to give you an example of a company that makes it their mission to buy locally, just to underscore what one company can do for Arizona's economy. Rick DeGraw over at SCF Arizona, I call him Mr. Arizona. He believes in Arizona, and they understand their role within the context of a healthy local economy, which means they're not always looking for the cheapest price, because guess what? The cheapest price doesn't create jobs, and guess what? When you're not creating jobs, you have fewer SCF Arizona contracts. So they're actually thinking long-term sustainably. Wait a minute, if we only invest in companies that aren't invested in Arizona, we're not going to have any clients left, right? That's how it goes. So they have made a commitment to buy locally. In fact, in 2009, when we did this study, they sourced 82% of their goods and services locally. 82%, that's an incredibly high number. So we had two measures, two really important measures that came out of this study. The first one is they spent $100 million. That was their budget, $100 million, but it had a $500 million impact on Arizona by the time it recirculated throughout the economy. That's a huge difference. The second area is even more important, in my opinion. They directly employ 518 people, but they indirectly support 3,600 Arizona jobs because of the way they award their contracts. So those jobs are in manufacturing and medical supplies, et cetera. So those are companies that rely on SCF Arizona to bring them business. So that is huge. Now imagine if we went to all of the larger employers in Arizona, demonstrated this study, and what if they all committed to just simply shifting a small portion of their spending? We took this study to APS, and they said, absolutely, we can do that. We're going to shift 5% of our spending. And they're doing that. And these are some big numbers, right? They switched their $2 million office supply contract over to WISC. We got a bunch of it, Blue Cross Blue Shield. is another one. We're trying to get them. They said, well, we'll switch to WISP, but who's got their insurance? And WISP said Humana, and Blue Cross Blue Shield went, aha. So now they're trying to switch and do business together, right? These are making big impacts. So talking about shifting, I'm going to bring this down to size a little bit. A lot of talk up here about all the different things that are going on at the state level, but I want to give you an example of what you can do. And this study, this is called Shift Arizona. I'm just out of curiosity, has anybody seen any of the marketing we've done? Did you see the light rail wrap around Shift Arizona? A few of you did? Okay. So this was a study that was done in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that showed that if one community the size of Tucson, if everyone in that community simply shifted 10% of their spending from a national to a local company, it would create $130 million new dollars recirculating in that community. It would create 1,600 brand new jobs and $52 million in new local wages. That's helping to create prosperity for all. For a 10% shift, I'm going to say that again so you understand. We're not talking about only spending 10%. We're saying if you looked at your budget today and you're spending 25% locally, I want you to get to 35. If you're spending 40% locally, I want you to get to 50. So it's shifting 10% of your existing spending. It would create $130 million new dollars, $52 million in new local wages, and 1,600 brand new jobs for one community the size of Tucson. So we created this campaign, and as part of it, we have a calculator that sits online at this website, shiftarizona.com, where you can enter your monthly expenditures. If you're curious, click I pledge to shift 10%, and it will tell you how much you're personally going to recirculate for things like parks and libraries and fire departments. So we've had to date over $62 million pledged on that website, and it's been up less than 2 years. So I want to give you an example. When I talk to you about the office supply contract, you should know that Arizona is one of 3 remaining states in the country that doesn't do anything to acknowledge that a local Arizona company or a local company does more for the economy than a non-local. So we're just looking for cheap price as opposed to really measuring the best value. And the best value can come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. But if you're looking at creating a healthy environment, sometimes you're going to spend a little bit more in the short term. Sometimes you can negotiate so you don't actually have to spend a little bit more. But what we've been unable to change the state laws. We've been trying for the last few years. But in the meantime, we had a huge breakthrough with the city of Phoenix. We got a very supportive mayor. Mayor Gordon was actually supportive of this, and Mayor Stanton is the one who actually came in and got this, the rubber to hit the road. We changed the procedure. We weren't able to change the law, but we changed the procedure. So the old model, any contract worth more than $5,000 used to go to an open public bid. And again, we don't care where you're from. We really want the cheapest price. So we changed that. We raised the threshold to $50,000, and now any contract worth under $50,000, staff is retrained. They simply go to a database that's populated only with Arizona companies. They get 3 bids, so it's still a competitive bid. Get 3 bids, go with the lowest, and they're done. Now, Mayor Stanton has made, that's a regional directory. So he has opened that up to all the other cities in Maricopa County, not only to use it, but to populate it with their own businesses. So one of my jobs is to go around and try to get as many other communities on board and get as many other businesses in that directory as we possibly can so that it's utilized, it's valuable. The thing that sparked it, what really got under people's skin is there was recently an example where the city of Phoenix needed additional T-shirt screen printed for the city of Phoenix, and the contract went to a company in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I don't know about you, but I feel like I could pretty much stand anywhere in Phoenix with a rock and hit a screen printer that could use a $15,000 job right about now. So that's just a breakdown of communication. That's not anything more than we as a municipality have not quite figured out how to best tap into the local business community, and the local business community is not listed in a place that we can find them. So that's when we raised our hand and said, wait, we can help. Because we've got 30 plus screen printers in our database, and the Phoenix Chamber, and there's a million chambers that could help with that problem. But we've been working on that, and the city of Phoenix has estimated they're going to be doing 18 or 19 million additional dollars in local business. It's 50,000 and under contracts per year. 18 to 19 million, and that number I think is going to be bigger, but we'll see. I'm an optimist. So again, continuing on this theme of broken social contracts is a good example. I mean, continuing on this theme of what can you do, broken social contracts is an important I use this as an example to get us to think about how we're involved in our own communities. So let's talk about Little League Mom, and she goes out week after week after week and she buys the team snacks. Okay, and she buys the team snacks at Costco because she believes that Costco is going to have the cheapest price. That's just in her habit, that's what she does. So throughout the year, she and all the other moms have been buying the team snacks at Costco. Then at the end of the year, they all get together for the, to plan out the year-end party for all the kids. All the moms are together now. We got all these kids, and they need food donated. They need a lot of food for the party. Do you think they're going to be able to go back to Costco and get donated food? No. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to go straight out and knock on Eddie Bash's door. Is what they're going to do. And Bash's is going to give them. And they gave and they gave and they gave until they almost didn't have any more to give. Bash's has given over $100 million to Arizona charities and can prove it since 1932. So how does this make sense? How do we think we can continue to pour money into this company over here that doesn't give back to our community in the form of charity, and expect that this company over here that we have not supported is going to be there to give to us? That doesn't add up, and that's what I call a broken social contract. We can't simply continue on that path and expect that it's going to work out for everybody in the long run. So I want to give you an example of a faucet. This is another example that relates to individuals. Let's say you have to go buy a faucet tomorrow. You have a million ways you could do that. A million ways you could do that. So I'm going to put them in order for you in the best or the biggest impact you can make locally down to the least impact. We won't say worst. We'll say biggest impact to the lowest. The number one thing you could do would be to go out and find an independent hardware store. Maybe you could even say, hey, is that an American-made faucet? Okay. You're paying your sales tax, you're supporting jobs, you're doing everything in a local guy. You know that he's got all these other local secondary and tertiary jobs behind him. That's the best thing you can do. The next best thing you could do is go to a True Value. True Value is an owner co-op kind of a situation. They have more employees that have ownership opportunities. They're truly invested. They're real strong in rural parts of America. The next best thing, right up there, clumped right underneath that, is going to be an ACE. An ACE is a franchise, but you can sure bet that the owner of that ACE franchise is probably rooted in this community. He's probably in there. You're probably going to see a Little League plaque on the wall. They're going to be rooted in that community. They're going to be paying their taxes locally, et cetera. Okay. Now there's a big drop. There's a big gap there. So those are your first three choices. And then the next down on the list is going to be a Home Depot or a Lowe's. We know that for every $100 you can spend in a Home Depot or a Lowe's, only $13 is going to stay in the community. Okay. The vast majority of the products in those stores are not manufactured in this country. And it's important that you understand when you spend money there, it's not going to any Arizona-based graphic designers, web developers, accountants. It just leaves. Okay. And the absolute worst thing, bottom of the list for your impact, you could go online and buy that faucet from an out-of-state company and not even pay your sales tax. Okay. That would actually have almost no impact whatsoever on the local economy. And a lot of people do that. I'll tell you a quick story. We have one online retailer here that has 5 million square feet of space here in Arizona, and they don't collect sales tax. You can buy from the other side of town, and they won't collect sales tax. And they claim it's because they don't have a physical presence here. Okay? So what does this mean for us here in Arizona? So they get a 9.3% advantage over bricks and mortar stores. They kept an estimated $750 million out of Arizona coffers last year alone. People actually think they're smart. We actually think, I'm so smart I saved my sales tax. Because we're so disconnected from what that means. I was having a conversation with a woman who was bragging to me about doing all of her holiday shopping online. But I wasn't going to say anything. I swear I wasn't. I was just minding my own business. And then later in the conversation, it became apparent that her husband was a firefighter. So, you can only be patient for so long. I said, so that's an interesting strategy you have. She said, what do you mean? I said, so you're actually purposefully not paying into the actual coffers that pay your husband's salary. And her face turned white. It's not that she didn't care. She just never thought about it. And that's where we all are. in this country, we are all in this place where we have forgotten our fiduciary responsibility in the role of who picks up your trash, why does that street light come on, why do I have roads, why do I have a public education system? All of those things we contribute to, and the deal is we pay our sales tax. So if we don't pay our sales tax, several things will happen. One is you're going to see closures. You're going to see things starting to fall apart. Your trash gets collected littler and littler. We're going to see a lot of political battles and a lot of mudflinging of everybody blaming everybody else. Well, who wasted the money and where'd the money go? And okay, but at the end of the day, I mean, the impacts are going to come right back into our lives. So our quality of life is going to go down. And then what? Then our property taxes go up, right? And then we have more red light running cameras to collect fees. Because what cities don't run without some sort of money coming in. They cannot continue to deliver our services if we're not paying into those coffers. And the deal we made is we would pay sales tax. If we don't want to pay sales tax, we're going to have to pay it some other way. And that's the bottom line. Or we can opt out. And I always jokingly say that with the guy who really is a big defender of online shopping. I go, you know what, if there was a box that you could check that said you're going to opt out of fire protection, I would be 100% behind you. And that catches people off guard because they're not really thinking about that. But I think it's important to talk about. Another couple of things I just want to hit on, at the end I want to leave room for Q&A. We are working on regional tourism. Arizonans spend $6.5 billion a year vacationing in California every year. And we have a set goal of redirecting just 10% of that into our rural communities. Now, how we're doing that is we're working with the businesses in those communities and teaching them how to use social media to market themselves as a destination. We just created a series. So far, we have 3 done, of video clips. And I encourage you to look on our website. It's called Weekend Zona. And we have a blog we've developed that shows you fun things to do around Arizona. Wine tasting, antiquing, the art district down in Bisbee. Just fun stuff that you can do. We've had some huge successes with that. When Greg mentioned, we just won the Governor's Tourism Award for Creative Collaborative Marketing. That was for Weekend Zona, specifically in Cottonwood. If you haven't been to Cottonwood lately, you don't know what you're missing. They have 5 tasting rooms, great restaurants. It's a blast. And the last thing I want to mention is we just launched Fuerza Local, which is our Spanish language initiative. It is local first for the Spanish preferred community. And we actually have a mixer tonight. We've got 60, 70, 80 businesses coming out to every one of our mixers and really getting involved and understanding how this impacts them as well. So that's going to be very important for Arizona's economy. So with that, I want to ask, how many of you learned something completely new? Great, great. I love that. And does anybody have any questions for me that I can answer? Miguel.
Since we're talking about tourism, how is it possible in downtown Phoenix, with so much money that was spent to create this local phenomenon, there's a big old thing advertising in Los Angeles.
Where?
It's on if you're coming up 7th Street.
It's like a billboard?
It's the building. It's like the building wrapped in.
Oh, interesting.
LA.
Huh.
I thought that was.
Do you know who? Well, we can talk about it offline, but I'm just curious. I don't know who owns the building. I haven't seen that yet.
It's on the building right above Eric Butcher.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so that's in Cityscape.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll find out.
What's across street?
That would be First Street in Washington.
It's part of a red project. I mean, and going on there is now visual pollution. They have got electronic billboards on top of that. I object to that downtown.
I'll have to go.
Period.
I'll have to go look too.
Yeah, I just
look.
noticed those the other day, and I'm just going, when did those happen? How did that?
You'll get a kick. At one time, I was a guest on a television show, and I was talking to in-state tourism, and they broke for a commercial, and it was like, "Visit Utah." It was just the timing was unbelievable. I thought it was funny, but I had several friends that were outraged. But anyway, yes.
This is a hard one, but is there a locally owned gas station?
There's a few, and it is tough because there's only so much of it. I like to explain it that there is no perfect. nobody's going to be perfect. And, you know, I am convinced that somebody is going to jump out of the bushes and snap a picture of me coming out of a Walgreens one day, you know? It's like, I do what I can. But so there's two that I know of, JJ's, which is on 16th Street in Osborne, and then there's one called, I want to say it's called Lucky 7, and I think it's on 7th Street and Maryland or Glendale, somewhere in that stretch. Lucky 7. There's only a few. So, yeah.
Is, like you were describing buying hardware stores, one I would say very possibly supersedes even buying local on that one, is buying with Sinclair. 100% of all of that petroleum comes from the United States.
Oh, wow.
All of it stays in the United States. We have at least 3 Sinclair stations I know of in the greater Phoenix area. I think there's 6. So what I'm saying is, and since I also have to buy gas, I exclusively buy gas at Sinclair for that very reason. So, you know, and so we're talking about secondary and tertiary and other fallouts from that.
Yeah.
Because there's one that's huge fallouts.
Great.
And I'm almost certain that Sinclair on 40th Street and Camelback is locally owned as well.
Okay.
And those are all franchises also.
Right.
So then you have many of those, like you're describing,
Right.
that some of the stores are going to have the local plaques. So.
Sure, and I like to explain, I love that question because there's so many different varying degrees of local. I mean, you can go to a local coffee shop and you might even be able to find a local roaster that supports that local coffee shop, but you ain't gonna find any locally grown coffee. You know what I mean? So there's only so far you can go, but I think it's important to acknowledge that every little bit helps. You know, like that 10% shift study really underscored it.
And you're buying beer that's, you know, brought in from China, so you know.
That's right. Or you could, you know, so many restaurants now are offering local beers and wines. It's amazing. I'm really excited about the enthusiasm. And what are we doing? We're building civic pride, right? And so many people are like, oh, this is my hometown brew when they have visitors coming in. You know, you got to try Four Peaks. You got to try Santan.
Do you know how GPAC is splitting their money? How are they spending? Is that 90% bringing in businesses from out of state, or how?
Yeah, I love that I'm being filmed. Hi,
sorry.
Barry.
GPAC, Great Phoenix Economic Council, for those of you who don't know.
No, GPEC was formed back in the day specifically for business attraction. So the deal was GPEC was going to work on business attraction and the Chambers of Commerce were going to work on retention and expansion. That deal has not really worked. So GPEC gets paid for the numbers of jobs that they attract into Arizona. So my feeling is that we need more dollars going toward even the retention of the companies that they've just attracted. Well, now that they're here, let's make sure that they fall in love with this place. Let's make sure we know what their employees' needs are so that we can meet those needs. Right now, that discussion isn't happening at the degree it should be.
So you go to LA, you can go to Santa Monica, for instance, and there are diehards that only go to Venice, which is literally like
Right.
4 feet over. But I also think that, like, when we start talking about what the first year in Arizona, because we've got this perceived personality in the United States that somehow it's us being that much more cowboyish. Mm-hmm. What has been your experience when talking about what the first Arizona? Do people think that you're, you know, one of those Arizonans that are trying to keep people out?
Great question. No, I think initially there was a response that we were being protectionist, but I think as a leader I have gone above and beyond breaking those stereotypes. I'll give you a great example. We have in the country, there are a lot of people who are, I believe, irrational and unproductive with their hardline stance on local. It doesn't help us if you're willing to even buy a screw at Home Depot if your money is sitting in a huge, international bank. So I think people need to be realistic about what impact they're going to make. But I think, I'll give you an example. Walmart obviously has a very big presence here, and a lot of people want to assume that I'm anti-Walmart, which I'm not. My approach is to sit down with Walmart and to say, hey, how many Arizona companies do you buy from today? They buy from 800 Arizona companies today. So my request to them was, would you be able to mark those products in your stores as Arizona grown or Arizona made so that your customers can participate in the 10% shift, right? They love that idea. Why does Walmart buy from 800 Arizona companies today? 10 years ago, I would argue that it wasn't even half that, maybe even a quarter that. Transportation, right? Their business model is attached to the most volatile industry in the universe, right? What happens when gas is $8, $10 a gallon? Suddenly your stuff's not so cheap anymore. So they're thinking out. They're local. I love saying that. Walmart's localizing, you know. Tell everybody. So it's not, I think that the days of people marginalizing this movement are gone, because we are looking at what has happened to the American economy. And you know, we're not being protectionist. We're simply saying we are out of balance. And how do we get that balance back? There was a Supreme Court judge that said in the 50s, when you substitute a nation of shopkeepers with a nation of clerks, enormous spiritual and emotional sacrifices are made. What he didn't predict was the economic sacrifices that we'd make. It's huge. I mean, I could go on for days with examples of how we have replaced shopkeepers with clerks. And we keep being told it's the economy. The feds are going to fix the economy over here. But what was our role in that? What was our role in that? It was big. It was very, very big. And I think getting over this whole notion that it's more expensive to go local is a really big hurdle. I'll tell you a real quick fun story, and I know we're out of time, but I had a guy come up to me, and he ran up and he said, I got to tell you, you really inspired me to think about how I was doing my spending. And he lived in Maricopa, and at the time Maricopa was the most upside down community in America. I don't mean in Arizona, I mean in America. They were really hurting. And he said, I've been buying my tires for my car and my wife's car every year in Phoenix at Costco. And the worst part is that my neighbor owns a tire shop, and I've never even been in it. Well, Maricopa really needs my sales tax right about now. Why am I not supporting my neighbor? So he's telling me this story. He walked into the tire shop and he said, well, Ray, I'm here to buy 8 tires from you, but you're going to have to match Costco's price. Well, Ray got a big, huge smile on his face, and he said, I'm cheaper than Costco every day. And he said, I'd be happy to match Costco's price if you'd like to pay a little more. Right? And he came back to me, and he's standing there, and he goes, boy, did I feel like a jerk. He goes, why did I just assume that it was cheaper at Costco? So what we've done is we've forgotten to shop around, and we just need to remember that and remember our role within the context of a healthy local economy.
A question that's sort of both practical and philosophical. When Cityscape came into downtown, on a practical level, do you think that it took business away from local retailers in the downtown area? And more generally, do you get a sense that new retail development in Arizona and kind of the markets are somewhat saturated? Do you think at a certain point it becomes a zero-sum game, even if it's local businesses, like maybe local businesses would end up taking sales ways in other local businesses?
Well, okay, so the first part of that question is no. I do not believe that Cityscape took any business from any downtown entity. I honestly don't. But the second part of your question is yes. It becomes a zero-sum game because we don't have enough density downtown. So what we're seeing right now is a really tough cycle of, you know, the Film Bar doing great, and then the Crescent Ballroom opens, and everybody just goes whoosh. And then, you know, you've got the Cupid's Trumpet open, and everybody goes whoosh. So what we're seeing is not quite enough people to support the multitude of great places that are showing up. But I think as we get density and as we get more people, we got a lot of people who work downtown. If we can just get them to stop and have a bite to eat before they go home, that would be a huge impact right there. But we trained them for years, 7 and 7, in and out, and let's not stop and mingle. And I think that's changing. I mean, if you go to the Crescent Ballroom after work, you're going to see a lot of loosened ties and people who just stopped in to see what was going on. And we didn't have that a few years ago. So as we increase density, I'm optimistic. We're still going to lose some. But I think in general, you're going to see it continue to be a positive influx of more and more businesses opening up. That's also coupled with the fact that we streamlined the process for adaptive reuse, which means it's now easier to open up a business in an old abandoned house or a blighted building. That's been a huge success story with the city of Phoenix. It's taken a lot to get there, but when the word starts to get out that, hey, this is a great place for you to find an old building. I mean, think about the messaging. Think about the messaging. We're trying to prove that we're cool to New York. Forget that. Forget it. We don't have to prove anything. How about if we say to the chef in New York who's 35, who's hugely successful, why don't you open up your own restaurant in New York? He'll go, oh my gosh, I'd need multi-millions of dollars worth of investors and yada, 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 yada. Oh yeah? Well, you can move to Arizona, open a restaurant, people will clamor around it, even if you do a pretty good job, and by the way, you can buy your building while you're at it. That's what we have. We have a great environment for entrepreneurs. People will give you a shot. Right? It's not an insider's game. It's not who knows who. It's, oh, wow, cool, a new restaurant opened. Let's go. You know? Yes?
I was having a conversation with a friend a while back, and I bought this water bottle that was made by Liberty Beholders, which is in Seattle, Washington. And she said, oh, that's a cool bottle. You know, I was telling her about it, and I said, oh, it's made in the USA. And she goes, oh, that doesn't matter. Is there, and I know it does, I know it matters a lot. And I always get kind of tripped up with my response to that. Is there an easy way to explain to people how it matters and why?
Sure. I think the first thing is just explaining that if other countries are making everything we're buying, who then works? Who has a job? So what does your friend do for a living?
She works for the Civic.
So you could just hit it right out of the park. Yeah, you could tell her that that her salary depends on a strong economy, and we're seeing this, you know, huge layoffs. The city of Phoenix is still so far down on the number of jobs for the people they had to lay off when this all happened. This state. So I think that's actually a really easy argument to make, that her salary is directly impacted by having how many sales tax dollars or taxes in general are recirculating in the community.
So even if it's in another state, but it's still in the U.S. Because part of me is like, well, tell that to the people who work there. You know.
Well, right, and the thing that really irks me is when people think, well, I'm not a manufacturer, what do I care? You know, but if they're anything, they're going to be impacted sooner or later. Do you remember that old quote, you know, first they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist, that Martin Niemöller quote or whatever his name is, and then they came for and then they finally came for me and there was no one left to speak out. You know, it's sort of like that, where you really, if you're not impacted right away, you know, okay, so the plant closes down and lays off 300 people. If you're not one of those 300 people, you're still going to be impacted in a number of different ways. So you could be an accountant that worked for the firm that had, you know, so maybe you're going to get laid off as an accountant, even though you weren't part of the initial layoff, you're going to get laid off. Maybe you were a graphic designer, you did the payroll for, you know, it could be a million different things. It's only a matter of time before those things ripple throughout the economy. So am I keeping you late? Where are we at on time? Okay. Okay, yeah, I just didn't know what time I was supposed to talk till. But I'm going to give you an example in my industry, in the record industry. So when Tower Records closed, a lot of people went, oh, well, that's too bad. Tower was cool. You know, they laid off, I think it was around 700 people across the country. 700 people lost their jobs. It's in the paper that day. And that's all we heard about it. Tower Records closed, 700 jobs lost. And that's kind of generally speaking in this country, that's all we think about. So when Tower Records closed, millions of dollars worth of merchandise got returned back to distribution plants. They were not anticipating millions of dollars worth of returns. In fact, they had maybe already spent that money banking on the fact that Tower was going to pay them their monthly bill. But instead they got it, you know, several $1,000s worth of returned goods, all of them did. So then we lost 7 American independent distributors within 3 to 5 months of Tower going down. So then when those distribution centers closed, hundreds of independent labels were impacted because they had their merchandise in the distribution system. So they got tied up in the courts, in bankruptcy court. So here's this little label out here. Wait a minute, that guy has all my merchandise, and now it's locked up in the court system because he claimed bankruptcy. I can't pay my bills. So there goes about 20 independent American record labels. And then you got the artist who's at the very end of the line that's not getting paid. So now let's talk about the thousands and thousands of American jobs that were lost when Tower Records closed. But that story doesn't get told. But that's true in every industry. When you hear the story about such and such a plant closing down, those impacts are going to be felt for years. And they may not even be measurable for years, but it's not just 300 jobs lost. It's not that.
Have you recorded your presentation? I've obviously heard it a few times, and I've tried to argue, and I have successfully best anyone who tries to argue against me, but they still will come up with some fantasy thing, and to hear it, especially from you with a lot of ways of presenting it, would be ideal. I can't get them to come to your presentation. So if I could, I mean, it's going to
give me his address. No, I'm just kidding.
No, him, it isn't a him, it's a bunch of hers, actually. Is if you want, so what I'm getting at is, give me more fuel to help with this, to make a joke real quick. You've turned this LFAZ thing that you started into a dogma. We're now in a church, it's a religion now, is that it? To be able to argue this point even stronger with others, that I can't get them to come to your presentation. So what I'm saying, have you recorded it so I can, you know, hey, click on YouTube and here's Kimber in this presentation that's excellent.
So, I'd be happy to help you with that. They're recording this right now. There's a few different ones on YouTube of me talking, but I'm not sure that that's gonna, you know, I'm not sure. Well, every bit helps, but I'm not sure what you can do about that. But I'm happy to, you know, email me if you get stuck on a specific question. Another thing that I found is really helpful if you find somebody. I was talking to a room full of graphic designers one time, and when we started the talk, it was primarily women. Most of them had firms with fewer than 5, 6 employees. When we started the talk, most of them said, "Yeah, I shop mostly at chain stores. That's what I do. Like, I don't think about it much, that's what I do." By the end of it, I pointed out to them, when I asked them, how many of you have a more thriving business today than you had 5 years ago? And they all said no. We have fewer clients today than we had 5 years ago. I said, so think about it. You're spending your money with companies that will never hire you. Never. Target ain't hiring a 6-person firm to design the new Target logo anytime soon. So I help them understand. And most people, you know, so here's a graphic design woman who's just like, oh my God. I said, you're spending your most powerful tool to effectively eliminate your own clients, your own future potential clients. And then suddenly they went, whoa, I got to change the way I'm doing this.
Well, what I'm finding is so many people are brainwashed that if it's in the popular press or coming through TV or the internet, that it's all of a sudden more sacrosanct or it's more the truth. And that's part of the reason I'm asking if you've got it on YouTube or something, because it'll be that last little bit that I can't do in a one-on-one.
Right.
And so hence the reason for my request.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a few on YouTube for sure. There were a few other questions. I saw some hands go up. Yes?
Just a quick one. I'd like to know how to buy more locally with local companies. Is there an online directory of this?
Yes.
Is there a website?
Thank you for asking. I'm always so caught up in the huge stuff, I forget the nuts and bolts. So we have localfirstaz.com. We have a directory with 2,100 Arizona businesses, and you can search by business type, by the name of the business, categories. You can peruse through the categories. That's the directory I referenced. It might have been before you came in, but we get about 38,000 searches a month on there. And it's growing. We're growing by 60, 70 new businesses a month. Yeah, it's growing very rapidly. So please utilize that. If you see a business that you love that's local and they're not in it, just tell them, hey, you should get involved. Yes, ma'am.
So about 5 years ago or so, there was a lot of discussion on Phoenix about, like, Phoenix is a community without an identified industry, and so there was the whole push for biotech and all that, and a lot of investments in that. And today, maybe it's just because of where I'm sitting, I'm seeing so much more excitement about startups and incubators, and there's really kind of, I think this is the second wave. There was kind of the downtown arts district, and now we have this really emerging incubator entrepreneurship movement in Phoenix. And so I'm just curious about your thoughts about those two things.
Sure.
And how do they relate to what you're talking about?
Sure. Excellent question. So first of all, I think our investment in biotech is brilliant, and I think that it's going to carry us a long way. And when you start seeing more, the U of A center, the Bioscience High School, obviously TGen and all of that that's going on, what we're doing is we're attracting a higher educated workforce that is more likely to support an independent restaurant. So I think they do feed off of each other, and I think for the first time in a very long time, we have development going on in the big stuff, what I call the silver bullets, and we have the fine-grained development advancing at the same time. So traditionally, Phoenix has been a place that thought, well, if we can just land this one stadium, or if we can just land this one thing, it's going to revitalize downtown. Doesn't work that way. But now we've got some great investment going simultaneously here, and we've got a lot of investment in redevelopment and a lot of folks that are really interested in the smaller projects. I'm starting to see cool little apartment complexes that were, you know, pretty rough, getting bought up and revitalized, and all of a sudden you got a whole new bunch of people moving in there. I still can't get used to the 8 stories going in on Roosevelt. I think it's great. Most people would think I hate it. We need the density, and they're going to have ground floor retail. But every time I round the corner, I still go, because I'm just not used to seeing it there yet. But it's very exciting. So that's a great question. I think we have both going on. Again, underscoring that type of incentive to put in a base industry sector, I think, is very different than restaurant or retail. So.
One of my concerns, though, is, for instance, that new place there. We've got that, we've got the Alto, we've got the Tapestry. They've all got that ground floor retail, and they're empty.
Yeah.
Absolutely empty. And I mean, I don't know how you see it, but I see that we have more retail space than we could possibly ever support in our entire lives. In Phoenix, it's exceedingly higher than in a lot of other parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice to say that you might have that retail there, but if you don't get anybody to come in,
right?
You know, and Tapestry, a lot of the old guard there are absolutely thrilled to death that they don't have restaurants there. They don't want the smell.
So, so a couple comments. You can put in ground floor retail till you're blue in the face if it's not well designed and if it's not pedestrian friendly, it ain't going to work. So the goal is, you know, on Roosevelt, if we have storefronts, right, we've already got pedestrian thing going on. So it's going to be a whole different game, in my opinion, than something that has a large setback and or is in an area that doesn't has everybody driving into their specific parking thing. That doesn't work. So it's got to be hand in hand. So some of it's going to work, some of it's not. I also think that there's a large demand now for freestanding buildings, cool little places where you can open up a restaurant, et cetera, as opposed to moving a restaurant in. I think there's a few great success stories. Morris Sushi is a great example of a ground floor restaurant that's really thriving. But yeah, it's not going to work for every type of restaurant. Some of them Chibo wants that quaint old house feel. So. Yeah.
So there's a lot of room for a lot of retail.
It'll grow as we get more density downtown. It will, but I hear very well what you're saying.
It's frustrating to go by these buildings that have been open for 5, 6, that kind of years, and it's just empty.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look good.
Yeah. No, it does not. Yes.
Oh, I was just going to say we have time for one more question.
Oh, okay, great. Anybody else? Good call. You predicted it.
Thank you all for coming. I know that the gentleman over there.
This presentation is brought to you by Arizona State University's Global Institute of Sustainability for educational and non-commercial use only.